Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live episode of To the Moon, Allison, where we talk about the top and trending works in speculative fiction, science fiction, fantasy, and romance. And I'm so pleased to be joined again today by speculative fiction award-winning author and graphic novel pen person, Ben, I don't even know what to call you, Benjamin Percy. Ben, welcome back to the show.
So happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Ben, I was just talking to you before we started about all the awards you've won, and I don't even know how to describe you because you write everything, you're doing shows, you're writing podcasts, not ones like this, because nobody writes this. This is just us talking. And I don't even know, do you just go by author or content provider? Because that sounds worse, honestly. What do you want to be?
I don't know. I'm, because I do write across mediums and I write across genres. I guess that's storyteller.
I like that.
Is the best term.
I kind of want to call you
I'm not too precious about it,
You're not too precious. It's fine.
Maybe one day when I break into interpretive dance or erotic haiku, I'll have a few more, multi-hyphenate titles to add to the mix.
I say do all of them. I was saying you're a gateway author so we're here to talk about a couple things. You just had, and I don't even know if it's out yet because when I went to find it on Goodreads, I had to put it in myself, which makes me think it hasn't come out yet. But your brand new novella, Hunter Gatherer, what's the release date for that?
That came out last week.
Okay, so that's why I'm the first.
So it's out. So thank you for putting a little chip on the stone tablet of Goodreads.
Someone needs to put the cover in though, because the cover is really awesome, and the little no image is just it doesn't do you any good. And that is really
have to let the company know. I definitely appreciate you helping with the hype on it. The company Neotext that puts out Hunter Gatherer and other ones I've done like The Wereworld or North Border and American Criminal. They're a great company in that they are supportive of novellas and short stories. But they're also simultaneously trying to create a transmedia property, which I know is a little bit of an obnoxious term, but just like the idea.
I don't even know what it means.
Let's think of this as both a prose and a TV show, and as a podcast, and a TV show, or whatever else. You take it out and pitch it to Hollywood sort of simultaneously as you're writing it as prose, and as a result of this, it's they're fantastic to work with. They have brilliant ideas. You can go back and forth with them on the phone. I have a really good relationship with one of the editors, John Schoenfelder, who's also a producer. But sometimes the actual book marketing thing doesn't happen.
They're there was one part of this we didn't get to, the marketing,
right.
And that would help for people to find it, because I'm there are a lot of things called that. None of them are this. I'm adding it now, and I did that. So have them drop the cover in. And I was saying it's ironic because I was joking that you're a gateway author. My husband is an avid graphic novel reader, but you give him just text and he's just I don't know what to do with this, which is ridiculous because he teaches writing to children. And I'm just you cannot be illiterate and teach writing. You have to pick one category here. But I think he doesn't do well with longer form. He loves short stories. And I'm this one has pictures, but it's not super long, but it's not a short story. So I feel I could give this to him and he would be satisfied because there are pictures, but they're not every page. And I love the fact that, and I said this in my review, I love the fact that because it isn't limited to a thought bubble, you get actual prose as opposed to what could I fit in a square that's this big and written in letters this big, where you have to then show more by picture. So you had to do more as a writer than you would when you're doing that. And I know we've talked before about how being a graphic novelist is different than being an author, but how the two work together and improves your prose. But I think you could be a gateway drug, and I like it.
Well, thanks. I work in comics. I've worked in comics for 10 years now, but I'm also, a nerdy prose writer. So this feels like a nice marriage of the forms. All of these neo-text novellas that I've written, they all feature somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 13 illustrations. And, when I think back on, reading the Dark Tower series by Stephen King, or Cycle of the Werewolf, which was made into the movie, super cheesy but awesome movie, Silver Bullet. When I think back on reading Dracula, the version of Dracula that I treasure most is the one illustrated by Greg Hildenbrandt. I might not be pronouncing his last name correctly. Or Charles Dickens' Christmas Tale. I have like these beautiful woodcut illustrations in that, and I just, those really seared themselves into my memory, and I wanted to put forward a story in a similar fashion where, every few chapters you just get this sort of signature visual that accompanies the action or accompanies a key emotional moment. And it's sort of like a hybridized form between what I've been doing in comics and what I've been doing with my novels.
Well, and I really liked it because I prefer, and I have read some graphic novels. My husband has had me go that direction, but I do prefer prose. And I do like having the picture every so often versus like I don't get more than a paragraph at a time before there's another picture breaking me up. But I love that has those signature pictures, like you said, because you'll describe something and then you get the picture of it. So your brain has a chance to kind of come up with it on its own. And then you see this and you're like, oh, that's way worse than I was thinking,
Right.
especially because of what the topic is here is like, that was horrible. Oh, that's even worse. Okay, good to know.
And you hope that it makes you linger a little bit longer. These visuals, which take up a whole page, are meant to be, sort of like moments where you pause and reflect, and this image crystallizes more fully in your consciousness, and the story, takes on a kind of a different level of impact. And working with Brent Schoonover, who's a good friend of mine, and we've collaborated on other projects like Devil's Highway, which is a graphic novel series that we did. It was fun just going back and forth with him and talking about the possibilities for the visuals in the story, because he could have gone in 40 different directions. And he, was like, this is the moment that's speaking to me. I'd like to play around with it. So yeah, I always like having a relationship with an artist that feels like we're collaborating. We're also just strenuously trying to tell the best story possible.
Well, I think the collaboration is beautiful, and I actually made sure to list it in the Goodreads. So I'm hoping that when the Goodreads full entry comes, it'll have his name too. And then I noticed you mentioned your editor. It said for Hunter Gatherer that was based on an idea from him. So do you want to tell us about that process? Because I've never seen something where it's like, oh, it's somebody else's idea, but it wasn't an IP I knew. So I know that when you do something like a graphic novel, you did not create Wolverine. We know that, but you've written Wolverine stories.
Yeah. And in this case, John Schoenfelder, I've worked with him on, whatever it is, 7 maybe or 8 of these novellas. They're not all out yet. And we just have the sort of relationship where we chat almost every week on the phone. And this is a situation where we're going back and forth about a sci-fi thriller I wanted to write. And he was like, what about doing something about a tech mogul, or what about space tourism? And I was like, yeah. And then we just started going back and forth and shaping this thing. And he's just a fantastically creative guy. And I wanted to make sure he got some credit for, sort of lighting the torch that led us down this dark passage together.
Well, I love that because I don't feel like I often see people say, hey, this idea was inspired by. You might see it sometimes in the acknowledgments, like, oh, I talked to so-and-so and they gave me some insight. But to actually say, hey, we had this conversation and it wasn't just me independently working in a vacuum. This was a group effort. I do laugh at the fact that you picked a tech mogul, and I was just picturing various punchable tech moguls in this place. And I will say you did a good job of not making anyone specific. Yeah, so you're on like, this is clearly Elon Musk, or no, this is Zuckerberg. This is you made up your own hateable tech mogul, and I feel like you did everybody a service with that. So well done with that without a specific one under the bus.
Yeah, I was thinking about, I'm always thinking about this. Speculative stories are oftentimes tied to a cultural moment, a societal moment of unrest, and I've talked before about how Godzilla comes out of the atomic age, and how Invasion of the Body Snatchers is, born out of the Red Scare McCarthyism. And I could just keep going. I could talk about so many stories, like the work of Jordan Peele, and, race relations in this country, and on and on and on we go. And I think that there's a trend right now that you see in movies like the latest Purge installment or Ready or Not. And there's there's one called The Hunt that came out not long ago. And anyways, there's this trend towards the elite, the 1%, being the bad guy. And that's because, right, there's this swelling divide. There's this swelling divide, but it just keeps becoming more and more of a chasm between them and the rest of us.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at who are the villains of today, it's Wells Fargo.
Yes.
It's Sally Mae. It's these institutions, sometimes banks, sometimes hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, or even universities that are supposed to protect us, look over us, but instead seem to be robbing us. Or, giant corporations that will remain unnamed, but are selling.
We will not name any of them.
Or maybe destroying indie booksellers. There
is that. I was just at a new one yesterday, so they're still coming, but they're struggling. But I was going to say, we just finished watching. Oh, go ahead.
I was just saying, putting a tech mogul,
yes,
at the core of this story. As somebody who is a charismatic bad guy, like I didn't want him to be like pure Bond villain or anything. I wanted you to get into his skull and poke around a bit. It was fun, and it also felt like a bit of a catharsis for me.
You're like, finally, I can address this. Well, I just finished watching Death and Other Details, and they took the whole ship of rich people and started picking them off one by one. And that was quite fun. And be like, oh no, the millionaire died. There goes the lawyer. And as a lawyer, I'm like, do I feel bad for him? Not really, no. Bye. No spoilers. I won't say how lots of people died.
There's something in the air right now. We want to.
It's something in the air. It's the well, speaking of things in the air, did you mean for that to be a segue to the Sky Vault?
Sure.
Because it works.
To be a segue.
That and who should be protecting us and things that are not protecting us. So we had you on before when you had The Unfamiliar Garden, which was the second in the Comet cycle. I keep wanting to say this is the final book, but I don't know if it is. How many books do you have planned for the Comet cycle?
We shall see. I mean, the whole idea behind it was that as I mentioned before, I've written for Marvel or DC for a decade now. And as much fun as it is to write Wolverine or Ghost Rider or Batman, as much fun as it is to be able to put a dent in that universe and, take some of my childhood heroes and, send them off on adventures. Like, these characters don't belong to me. I'm their custodian. So I wanted to create my own sandbox, a universe that I could play around in. And so the Comet cycle is that. It's the Percyverse, if you want to call
Percyverse. I like it.
Hashtag Percyverse.
Just don't confuse it with Percy Jackson, because that's somebody else's sandbox already. So Percyverse, Comet cycle. I keep wanting to say you have Sky Vault, and then my brain goes to like souls involved, and then I get Soul Cycle, and that's totally different too. So I'm like, Comet cycle, stay on that. But this is
a branding opportunity.
Yes, that or cross promotion, because I'm like thinking Comet, and that's what I use in my dishwasher. But I don't think that's what we're looking for. But the whole idea.
Some ads into this novel.
Yeah, like product placement right there. But this is the third one, and each has been set in a different state in the United States. And this is probably also, it felt like the most international, because we had involvement from China and other places as well. But we started with something that was metal, ninth metal. Then we went to mushrooms or plants. And now we're dealing like, this one's clouds. How do we get to clouds?
Yeah, meteorology and quantum physics. They all have like something sciencey underscoring them.
Underscoring it, and then at the heart of it, we start with a person who's kind of a cryptid / crazy person. And I love how, as he's referenced by other people, like, this guy keeps bothering me. I'm like, I wish he'd bother me. He seems like a fun guy with his Hawaiian shirts and crazy. The Grizz radio. Is there actually a radio station called the Grizz? Because if there isn't, there should be.
There is not. The original one, I actually labeled the radio station the Moose at first. I think their tagline was hang loose on the moose. And it turned out that there was a radio station called that. So I had to
can't use it.
I had to change it to the Grizz.
But I like the Grizz because it feels like it's one of those things like, this is the Grizz. And you can hear them saying that on the radio with the different DJ voices. I don't have a
Tune into
DJ
the
voice.
Grizz.
Yeah, exactly. You have the
Your
Grizz voice.
classic
You can do
rock
that.
favorites.
There, you can do your own promo especially if, well, and I don't know, is the company who put out Hunter Gatherer also the one who does the see, I'm calling it Soul Cycle, the Comet Cycle, or is that a different?
No, totally different companies. William Morrow,
Okay.
traditional publisher, is the one that puts out the Comet Cycle books, and there could be like 6 of them, there could be 20 of them. We'll see. Just as a sidebar, like I'm developing it with Sony right now as a TV show, and we'll see if we can
Metal.
Yeah.
So would they call it Ninth Metal?
It's for all of them.
Right. Okay.
And we'll see if it goes, then there's much more likelihood that I'll keep pumping out these books in alignment with it. But yeah, Neotex, they only publish books digitally right now. They're almost like a magazine more than a book publisher, even though these stories are 90 pages or 100 pages. You can only read them digitally at present, but down the line, I hope to put out a book of these novellas, like an actual physical book, and bind them all together. Yeah.
Well, I would love something where framed of the panels inside too, because it's so visually stunning that I would love to have that. Now, there's the covers of the books for the Comet Cycle are beautiful, but there are no illustrations in there. So I've had to do all that up here. So I've had heavy lifting up here, especially for some of the weirder things that have happened. And I'm just going, I probably am happy I can't see some of these things because some of them are probably beyond my ability to sleep at night after I've seen them. But one of the things I love, so you mentioned you could have as many of these as you want. I say you need at least one per state, plus Puerto Rico and DC. Don't leave out any of our territories. They will feel very excluded. But yeah, each one's been set in a different state. So
one set in every state. I'm on it.
I'm a little concerned what you'll do to me down here in California and what it might involve, like oranges coming to get us, or maybe Mickey Mouse. I'm not really sure because I'm kind of dangerously close to both.
I like the idea of sentient oranges. Yes,
sentient oranges coming to do horrible things. But I liked the spin you put on it, and I don't want to say too much about it because one of the things that I liked about these books is they can be read in any order, and I feel like there was nothing really spoiling the earlier ones having read this one, although it put some, like, there were references to things that happened around the metal or what happened in Seattle with the mushrooms. But I don't feel like if somebody started here, they'd be like, oh, now I don't want to read that because I know how it turned out, because you really don't. You just get like a little nod to it.
That was, it was an effort to combat attrition, because normally when you have a series, 1, 2, 3, 4, every single one of them sells fewer copies. So the idea that you can read the Comet Cycle in any order, and that they're speaking to each other, they're kind of like a family of books or a bestiary of books, in the same way that, something like Lois Lowry's, The Giver and Gathering Blue and Messenger are, and yeah, or if you think about comics again, you can read Wonder Woman and Green Lantern and Superman and Batman. They're all intertwined, these titles. They're all part of this larger narrative tapestry, but they're also individual stories. So it was that was an effort to sort of mimic what was going on over there and bring it into, my novels.
For me, I just think Discworld, because you've got the whole, like, different stories told within different characters, but you don't have to read them in any order. And I didn't read them in order, and I usually don't recommend people read those in order because the first ones were my least favorite. So I'm like, don't start here, pick up over here where things make a little more sense, and we can come back to this one later. But I love that because I do know that whole attrition thing. And then when people will also see a larger series, it's also that kind of buy-in factor of like, well, that one looks kind of good, but do I want to read 7 books to get to it? You don't have to. You can start with this one, and then if you like it, go back and read the other one. So you don't have to read each one, but I think you'll want to, personally, because I enjoyed them. And I like the fact that they are so grounded, because I was talking to my book sister, who part of the reason we have this show is she won't read fantasy, and she won't read science fiction, and she definitely won't read romance. But she makes me read horror because she's like, you don't need to sleep at night, do you? So I've kind of gone more towards the horror, but she still is not really into a lot of the fantasy science fiction stuff, because a lot of it feels unapproachable to her and too made up and too ridiculous. And I'm like, you will want to read these books because they're none of that. I'm like, they're real world set. They have real scientific concepts. And yes, they go in weird places, but they're not ones where you're like, oh, look, a person with made up name is going to made up planet talking to the made up aliens, and none of this means anything. And I know some people love those things, and I will read those when they're done well, but those kind of things are often off-putting for people who are like, I don't read genre fiction. And she will read genre fiction, but not science fiction usually. And so I love how approachable yours are, because we're set in Fairbanks, Alaska.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate what you're saying. I appreciate what you're saying in that I'm trying to put a crack in the mirror of this world. Like, it's our world except for, this one thing.
Exactly.
And it just makes it more digestible, more concrete. As for setting it in Fairbanks, Alaska, there are a few reasons that I did that. I've been to Alaska several times, and it has totally enchanted me. And I wanted to make it the stage of my fiction just because it's so dramatic. But also, I mean, it's the last frontier. That's their motto as a state. And it feels like a place where something, it's the edge of the map. It feels like a place where something otherworldly could occur. And beyond that, when I was visiting, I mean, a few different things about these visits. One is that when I was in Fairbanks, I noticed all these atmospheric science buildings, like staggered in these black spruce forests, and they look like something out of Stranger Things.
You're like, that's not supposed to be there.
Immediately latched onto that. And atmospheric sciences are big in Alaska because of its proximity to the poles and because of the dark skies up there. But also, my grandfather was stationed in Alaska during World War II, and people don't usually think of Alaska and World War II together.
No, but, I didn't really think about that. And you have stuff that references that. His last name wasn't Warnock by any chance, was it?
It was not, no.
Just checking.
Moore was his last name, but he was stationed up there. I was halibut fishing outside of Seward, Alaska one time, and went by this big spire of rock, and at the top of it was a kind of fort, and these were locations where people were watching for warplanes. That's where he was stationed. He was in one of those fortresses, just guarding the coastline.
Were they expecting something from Russia? Because I'm like, last I checked, we were kind of on the same side as they were for at least part of the war.
Yeah, Japan. And there was an incursion at one point. And anyways, so I was thinking about that. I was thinking about him. And that also gave rise to, one of the stylistic challenges of this story. I always like to have an aesthetic hurdle, like to do something different that I've never done before when I write a book. And in this case, I wanted to have dueling narratives. So there is the present and there is the past. So the past is that World War II era story, which you're getting from journal entries left by Warnock, who you already mentioned, who's a scientist.
Who is not related to you. He's not a real person.
Not related to you, no.
Just checking.
My grandfather was not responsible for this crazy atomic research taking place there. But, everybody's talking about Oppenheimer right now. Just won Best Picture. And, I thought, like, what if there was another program going on at the same time? We're all familiar with the Manhattan Project, but what if instead of trying to split or crush the atom, somebody was trying to, at the same time, spin the atom and create, as a result of this, a kind of space-time continuum portal, which is theoretically viable. We talk about them as wormholes and such, and that's the way you get one of these starships, right, from one part of the galaxy to another in all of these movies and all these books. And in this case, I thought, well, MacArthur would be really interested in something like that. If you could hypothetically march an army, from a base in the U.S. directly into the European theater.
Surprise!
Or if you roll a bomb through and then shut the portal. So you have Los Alamos, and then you have Fairbanks, Alaska, which is the home to the Alaska Project.
Well, and I love how you attracted
intersect.
You attracted this whole idea. I'm like, okay, so we have the dual narrative, and I'm currently reading a craft book that's like, you have to have one protagonist. I'm like, no, you don't, because you wove not just dual timelines, but you also had multiple people who are in the present, who are interacting with what's going on there and having different places. Everyone from a female contractor who isn't getting taken seriously to a person who isn't. There are a lot of people who weren't getting taken seriously, either a teenage boy, a female contractor, or a DJ who's like, I am not an amateur meteorologist. I've been giving the weather report for 20 years. I love that credential. Like, I'm not an amateur. How dare you? I'm a crackpot. Yeah, but I'm not an amateur.
Yeah, with all these characters, I mean, I think, one, you have a major advantage when you're writing suspense if you have multiple characters, because you can bring a storyline to a head. Like, here's this physically or emotionally perilous moment, and then you just cut away and you go to your other character, leaving your audience going, what happened to them?
I did that a couple times. I'm yelling at the audiobook, where are we? Why did you leave?
That's an advantage of the wide-ranging cast, but also, you know, I think that they all have something in common thematically. You were already pointing out that they're going through similar struggles. You know, they're at this critical juncture in their lives, a time of change, and kind of a moment of in-betweenness. Like, the Rolf character is facing retirement, and he's got these feelings of inadequacy, and then Theo, he's the teenager. He's like gone through this sudden growth spurt, so he looks like a man, but he still feels like a kid.
Suddenly realizes he can throw people around.
Right, exactly. And Joanna, the contractor, you know, she's inherited this construction company, but it's on the verge of bankruptcy, and she's not being taken seriously. And they're all these characters are striving for relevance. And in a way, I think of their stories as sort of like time travel stories, and that they feel a little bit wobbly. That's from the very first line of the book, even, that their history and their future don't seem to line up. They didn't end up where they thought they should be.
That's exactly where he was starting, where not Theo, but his dad, where it's like, this is not where I thought I was. Why am I in a jail cell? Like, this is not what I was supposed to. I was supposed to be taken seriously. This is not going well, really, at all.
Yeah. And that carries over to just like the whole idea of the book, which is unstuck in location and unstuck in time, you know, with the quantum stuff going on.
Well, and I thought you handled yes, you did cut away, but I thought you handled each scene and then how you connected the scenes thematically just beautifully. So even though you may be walking away at that tense moment going, I need to know what they saw, what did happen in this place, when we got back to it, it would make sense. And sometimes the transition would be perfect between one and the next place, and going, okay, but I did need to know what was going on here. All right, I'll accept it for now, but you better get back to it soon. And I always love when I read larger cast stories, those moments of collision, that when you get pulled over in a car, I'm like, I know who you just pulled over. Or where they're going and what's happening, and to see those points, and not that necessarily everyone has to all stand in the room together at the end and link their arms and sing Kumbaya, but to have the storylines connect. You handle that really well in a way that never felt trite, but always felt natural. Like, this is the progression of the story and where this was going and how this is all going to wrap out, even if it ends up in a place where you're like, yeah, the world's not going to be the same after this, which I liked, because a lot of times I feel like sci-fi gets us to the brink and then goes, oh, good, we averted whatever it was. And since you're continuing, I hope, to keep writing more here, I want to see where this is going to impact people down the road. And hopefully nobody's taking up actual metal eating. Like, public service, nobody eat metal. Okay. I don't want to find you out there like chewing on tin foil. It does not have special properties. Those in Britain, no aluminium, none of that. Don't do it. But what kind of thing would you suggest? Like, I've got some foil here. I'm not going to eat it. If someone wants to experience the metal eater, the metal is mentality, and are you going to do something with that going forward? Maybe offer for merch, like metal candy. That's not a thing, is it?
Well,
don't do.
I've always had an interest in cults.
I just love interest in cults. Yeah, sure.
Well, I mean, I grew up in Bend, Oregon, which was close to where the Rajneesh set up their compound, and maybe you're familiar with the Rajneesh.
I'm not.
The Netflix documentary, but it was a cult that was located in the middle of nowhere, Oregon, and we used to go after the compound was taken down. It just sort of like sat there and rotted, and my family would go fossil hunting there. So I was thinking about that, but also I have some family members who were in a cult, and not that one, another one.
You're like, different cult.
Totally different cult. Yep.
Totally
And
different cult.
it was
You're
really
not slandering any
fascinating
particular cults.
watching them get drawn into this and sometimes end up at a financial loss because of it. And, every cult eventually disbands. And so there's kind of a confusion that follows as to one's purpose and identity. And yeah, just, observing that over the years, I've written about cults in a few different capacities. One version of this is in Wolverine: The Long Night, which is a audio drama that I wrote for Marvel. And it's available wherever you listen to podcasts for free. But there's a cult in that. There's a cult in these Comet Cycle books, and it's devoted to, the cosmic. And when there's sort of like, I'm flirting with the multiverse in this book. And they are, when they're smoking these salts, that come off the metal, they are able to sort of like connect to the like a frequency in the same way that Chuck Bridges in this book, that his name even is significant about that sort of like bridging that gap. He's hearing
Not the
things
Chuck
in
part, because he
in the
just has
radio
a
waves.
because he just has a white guy middle age name, Hank, Chuck, whatever.
Yeah,
I love that part.
The
I'm laughing at
the bridge part is important, but
the
he's
bridge part, not the
he's
Chuck.
a DJ and he's listening. He has this omnimetal
Antenna.
He keeps hearing
Mhm.
these voices that are coming from elsewhere, and they usually are accompanied by some sort of supernatural meteorological event in the sky. Anyways, in the same way that people who smoke omnimetal, they end up tapped into that same frequency and seeing visions or hearing things from the stars. And eventually they take on a kind of like Dune-like, appearance, and that their eyes start to kind of spark.
Sparkle the
Uh,
blue.
yeah. So
Or the
those
wintergreen
fun.
lifesaver effect, as you pointed out, because I laughed so hard. I'm like, do they even still make the wintergreen lifesavers? Because now I really want to do that with my kids. Like, okay, everybody, bite your omni-metal and see if it makes the
That's
spark
right.
in the
Yeah,
dark.
yeah. Yeah, if you don't
I
know
love
what we're talking about, if you go in a dark room and you chomp on some of those wintergreen lifesavers, it creates these sparks in your mouth that are really cool.
I
So
swear they had us
those,
do it at Outdoor Ed, but I haven't seen them in years. So I'm just going like, did they stop making them? Did they realize they were
no, they're
secretly
still out there.
Okay, just checking. Like,
I
are we
do
allowed to do
with
this
Netflix
anymore?
not long ago.
Well, and the whole idea of having these different things, and it's all, we're using it as metal, we're using it as a battery in these cars, and we're using it in all these different places. I'm just excited to see what else you're going to do it in, and maybe there's a pairing with a local restaurant. You can have some the mushrooms in a risotto, maybe, and what
Oh wow.
what kind of gastric
We're all about
experience
the
and
cross
seeing
pollination. I
stuff.
like that. Yeah. We're using
Like,
an omnimetal fork to eat your
to
your
eat
alien fungus.
your alien fungus risotto. I'd be down for that. I'm just excited to see where else this is going to impact it, because I feel like so often when I read things that talk about not necessarily an apocalypse, but like a world changing event, because the world hasn't ended after this comets come through, but it's very much changed. I love seeing all those changes and seeing how you imagine our world, but just a little, like you said, with a crack in it, and that crack came from this comet that's done all these things. So I love seeing that, and if it does something weird to oranges, let me know. I'll stop eating oranges. But just the different things and watching how each part comes out. I love the imagination involved and seeing how it impacts these regular people's lives, because to me, that's more interesting than seeing people who I can't relate to, who have ridiculous and exciting lives to begin with. I can much more relate to the lady whose company is not really hers and kind of failing. I don't relate as much to the mercenary character you have in here, who is amazing and quite badass, and I admire her, but I can't relate because I don't think on my feet. Yeah.
But everybody else is kind of an everyday Joe who's thrown into
Yes.
extraordinary circumstances. And, that's a lesson I learned a long time ago from Stephen King, in that almost all of his characters are, with the exception of the occasional successful writer that he has as a protagonist, almost all of his characters are just people, everyday people, thrown into extraordinary circumstances. And that's who, most people find easiest to align with.
Yeah, they're the most interesting to watch go through these circumstances because they're the easiest to say, hey, that could be me, not this person, the chosen one who has all these magical
Yeah.
things innate about them. Like, I am
No more
99%
chosen
sure I'm
one
not
narrative,
chosen.
please.
Yeah, I can't deal with it because I'm not chosen, not for a whole lot of stuff. So it's best to have them as characters that we can go, yeah, I can see that. I think I'm a kind of good dancer. I know I'm not a good dancer.
I'm
I'm
always
just laughing.
interested in the misfit toys.
Yes. And you have beautiful misfit toys throughout all this, and including in Hunter Gatherer with some very sad misfit toys, not necessarily the moguls. They're their own misfits in their own way. They're like, oh no, no one can relate to me because I'm a quadrillionaire. Oh, so sad for you. So very, very sad. So what are you working on now? Because I was looking at your list of everything you're working on, and I can't even keep track of it. Do you have a schedule of when you've got to move from working on one thing to another thing throughout your day, or do you focus on one project till it's done, or do you just talk to your editor and he tells you what to do? Especially if you've got more than
I
one
always
place.
have, from Marvel, like a list of deadlines.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always observing those on my calendar so that I'm just ahead of them because like they're drop dead deadlines. And if I don't make them, the comic isn't published on time and then I'm fired or the artist doesn't get fed, and so
We need to feed
I
our
have to
artists, people.
need to feed artists. So I'm always thinking about those, but ideally I'm in a situation where I can have long blocks of time that I can immerse myself in something like a novel, because the novel takes so much heavy lifting.
It takes a lot of headspace and jumping between projects. Is that something you've gotten better at? Because I know for me, I have a hard time. Once I'm in a project, I don't want to leave until I'm done, and I can walk away from it and then come back to it for edits. But I don't like being like, okay, right now I'm working on this. Stop that, jump over here, because my brain doesn't even know where I am.
Well, when I was really in the thick of it with Marvel, I was writing almost 2, sometimes 3 comics a week, and it's just you don't have a lot of time for other things when that's your situation. So
Or sleeping.
I'm thankfully in a place right now where I have a little bit more time because I'm stepping away from certain series and I'm able to like spend the past 2 weeks working on a screenplay, and that's it. Almost doing nothing else. So yeah, having that like deep focus is really essential in building stories. But I've had to at times, just out of necessity, have more of a cascading focus, which I guess you could say is more multitasking, where you're just like working on this thing, but also thinking about this other thing and trying to answer that email, and it's just not super conducive to an imaginative life.
Well, and I know friends who project top, and I know they do it partially because like I've lost interest with this. Something shiny over here. And for one, I can't do that. I need to be moving forward. And if I get stuck or I'm waiting for something to tell me how to go, then I just feel like I'm just spinning in circles, waiting to get going forward momentum on whatever project. But I know, like you said, sometimes you don't have a choice because you're like, I'm told to do this and there's a deadline and that artist over there, he's my friend and I want to make sure he eats. No starving artists. Are anywhere on your thing? I saw you had Teen Titans on your list, but I didn't see Teen Titans Go. Do you write for the cartoon show that my children are addicted to?
No, I wrote the comic, which was not as funny as the TV show. Teen Titans Go is hilarious. My kids love that as well. But the Teen Titans, the comic tends to be a little bit more.
Oh, they're serious.
Yeah, and teen drama, and it's more like a YA vibe.
It is. It is like a YA.
Like gonzo absurdity of Teen Titans Go.
Yeah, where it's mostly fart jokes and silly things, and then they're told to be serious, and they really can't do it. But we are a Teen Titans Go family, and when I saw the Teen Titans, I'm like, oh, that's the serious version where they're all tall and have serious faces instead of everybody just being ridiculous all the time. But
there's also some angsty teenage stuff going on.
Yeah, there's not a lot of angst other than Robin really wanting to kiss Starfire on the TV show and her like, I would rather marry my cat. So, that's kind of how she works. And then Robin becomes a cat for a while. So that's their level of humor. But I can understand that's probably not what you're writing for because it doesn't have the depth. It has more of the silliness, but it tells us it's why my kids know about mortgages and bees as currency. So I think
that show's really clever. So
I love it. It's just I don't see it necessarily. Oh, I think you could be that funny, but you might need to scale back some of the violence and some of the grossness, other than toilet humor, because that's kind of where they're like. There's not a lot of blood and guts. It's more just You
That's
know,
my constant, the constant maxim of Marvel is like, settle down, Percy.
so
Fewer,
they're like
fewer
bringing it back in.
fewer entrails in this, please.
The artists have requests drawing fewer entrails. Well, how do they feel about someone's tongue removed? That counts as an entrail if it's come now. Oh,
We've been there. There's definitely like weird rules Marvel has. Like, you can't show like, broken bone coming out of a severed limb, but you can still sever the limb.
That seems kind of arbitrary. Like, if you see, what if it's not facing,
we all have to have a code, even if the code doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that's true. They're just like, well, we can't, if it's turned away, the artist has to turn it away so the bone's sticking that way, so it's hidden, but it's not attached anymore, so there's probably a bone in there unless the bone came out, in which case you got other problems like jellyfish. Like, it's just bone.
Sometimes it even goes down to the wire with last minute approvals or people being at the last second before it goes to the printer, like, no, we can't do that, so the art's already done, and suddenly they have to make it into like a silhouette.
No, they're like, by the way, this one's black and white, and then everything went black. That's not what I wrote. Well, it's gonna be now. And then it's just a wintergreen lifesaver sparking in the dark, maybe some omni metal.
But again, I'm working for Marvel or DC. Like, these are my characters, they're not my brand, so you have to play within the rules, and that's a valuable lesson when I'm writing for or being approached by other companies, and they're like, here, what's your interest in this franchise, whether it's James Bond or anything else? Like, you can only stretch so far, be so like elastic.
You're a steward of their character, and you have to kind of keep it with what they want that character to be, and you can't present it in a way that they're like, hold on, this is not what the branding of this character, what audiences expect. And you're like, okay, I'm going to go over to my sandbox and make a similar character where he's going to do all the things I want him to do.
You can't, for instance, suddenly make Wolverine into the Molverine and have him like crawl beneath the ground digging with his claws.
But moles do have claws. You can totally do it. So we were watching Ice Age Continental Drift, and there's a mole with like the claws. So I think he could. I don't know if Hugh Jackman would sign off on that. He's like, I don't want to get all dirty. He's like, I got dirty enough doing Les Mis, but maybe he would if he got to sing. If he make Wolverine sing, he's probably on board. Because he's like, let me show off my vocal prowess and not just my abs or whatever. But if you're working on if you're working on the Ninth Metal as a screenplay, as pitching as a show, do we have how is that coming along in terms of when do I get to watch it? That's really all I care about. And can I participate in the casting? I'm not a certified casting director. No one actually cares what I say, but I like to dream castings.
Yes. Well, I definitely want your dream casting. The market's a little weird right now because streaming is in a state of correction. Like, they overspent on streaming, they made too much, and now everything is just like, let's tighten the purse strings, let's not make as much, let's merge with different, you're going to see like something similar to cable packages coming down the line where a few of these streamers bind together.
Cable again.
Yeah. And not only that, but the writer's strike and the actor's strike, that was basically shut down last year. So there's all sorts of correction going on right now. So we have, in other words, the pitch ready, and we have the pilot done for the Ninth Metal. And there's all sorts of cool, powerful people attached to it. But we were just waiting for the market to be open-minded, because you don't want to take it out to Netflix and take it out to Prime, and they're like, we're not making anything this year that costs that much or whatever. Like, so.
And you want a good budget. You want to make it work.
Yeah. In April, we might pitch it, but we might just keep waiting until things get a little more fluid again.
Well, I hope it gets fluid soon.
In the shadow's waiting to pounce.
We're like, Apple TV Plus, they put out really good stuff. I like what they did with the Foundation. But yeah, I mean, there are different places, but you're right. They're all at this point where it feels like people are also cutting back because there are so many of them that then they're going to have to correct again to go, okay, how are we going to make this so that people can afford this variety of content? Because now it feels like there's no center thing that everyone's watching anymore, because nobody all has the same stuff. We don't all have the same. I don't know anybody who still watches actual television. Like, we're like, no, it's the Roku, and we put on streamers.
I think that's a problem. I think that people want to have a common conversation, a water cooler conversation about stories
And I think
that they're
since Game
sharing.
of Thrones,
And
we haven't had one.
yeah, it's all so fragmented, and everybody's in these little silos where,
Hmm.
there's a small
And
group
I
of
watched
nerds that
Silo, but
freaking.
not everybody did. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's just it. There's too
Again.
much out, and even like we were all talking about Marvel
Hmm.
as we went from Infinity War to Endgame. Everybody
Hmm.
was talking about that. Everybody
Yep.
was watching that. But then they made so many different things that now who even knows if your friend saw this TV show or that movie, or like it's all
I
diffuse
did, but it
now.
was just me, I think. Like, I know a lot of people
Yeah.
didn't watch all the television shows, and then people are like, well, why would I want to go see this movie? And I'm like, because it has Kamala Khan in it and she's the best. But not everybody watched that. And people are like, well, then I don't necessarily want to see that because she's the lead, and I want to understand why her mother's like that. And I understand that. So again, you're like saying the correction, and that's part of the correction too, is
Yeah.
kind of reeling
Everything's
back how
correcting
much
itself.
they want. Yeah, I think you're right, but I hope that the correction flows itself so that they can then be giving you money and having these shows show up, so I can be like, "Ooh, I get to watch Ninth Metal," and then maybe have
Yes.
mushrooms. I'll be eating
Fingers
mushrooms while
crossed.
watching Ninth
Yes.
Metal.
Have mushrooms, alien mushrooms, and then watch the Red Metal for maximum
Ben,
experience.
you are amazing, and I definitely. You said the Wolverine one that's the audio drama is The Longest Night or The Long Night. I'm going to type it in
The
wrong
Long Night.
for the
Yeah,
Wolverine.
Wolverine, The Long Night. If you look that up again on any
Mhm. I'm just typing it now.
podcast, app, you can listen for free.
Okay, I'm typing it out so people can find it. And by people, I mean me later because I won't remember.
Yeah, it's like it's a TV show for your ears. It's got a bunch of great actors in it, and it's a murder mystery. Also set in
Ooh, it's
Alaska.
murder. Oh, and it's in Alaska? Well, that makes sense, though,
Yeah.
because, he's been there. But I love those kind of things. We had on Christopher Golden when he did Slayers, and I feel like the audio drama is, it's making a comeback. And when we have these kind of things where it's, for me especially, I do pretty much all my reading, other than novella length, because I can handle that. I do almost all my reading by my ears. So I love having something where I love real amazing narrators who bring these stories to life, and an audio drama is like extra level up. So I love it.
Yeah. I was just
Ben, you
nerding
were
out on
amazing.
Impact Winter last night, listening to that while I was doing dishes. So that's
Impact
another.
Winter.
Yeah, it's a audible drama. Chris Golden did Slayers. This is
Mhm.
another vampire drama. This one
Nice.
set in the post-apocalyptic future. It's pretty sweet so far. So yeah,
You're like,
I'm
I'm
always
taking it.
listening to stuff as well.
I am too. And for people who are like, I don't have time, I'm going, do you have to do dishes and laundry? Then you have time. Because for me, like if I'm just doing dishes or laundry, I will lose my mind after 2 dishes. And I get a lot more done if I'm listening to something and then continuing to do all the things that have to be done around here. Because
Exactly.
I'm the only one who does them. Haha.
Yeah.
Ben, you
You're on
were
a car
amazing.
drag, you're walking the dog, whatever. I'm always
Yes.
multitasking.
Me too, except for if I've got my kids in my car, because then they just keep talking and I can't let them listen to most of what I'm listening to because all of it is inappropriate. They have their own stuff. And I listen to adult things, and I don't mean adult as in all sexy stuff. I just mean not for my 8-year-olds.
Not for the wee one.
Thank you so much for joining us here today. And I would love to have you back next time you've got anything out or you have a show to tell us about who got cast in it and who's in the pilot. I want to know. And we would love to see you then. And meanwhile, we will be back tomorrow on Vox Vomitus with Kimberly Garrett Brown with Cora's Kitchen. So we'll be very historical and thoughtful and probably not have any kind of atom smashing going on or crushing or bending apart. I don't think that's going to happen in her book. I read it. It doesn't. I can promise that. Thanks so much. I will see you next time. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you're subscribed to the Vox Vomitus channel. Bye.